Marriage. Hey, is it forever? Can the parties enter an agreement that says they won't get a divorce, and is that agreement enforceable? Well, it takes us to this week's case. It involves a real party, Rebecca and Joseph in Virginia. They were originally married in 1980 in Illinois. They moved to Virginia, and in 2014 they entered into a postnuptial agreement. Now, postnuptial agreement, it provides that a couple after getting married can have an agreement that states how the property will be divided in the event of a divorce or death or something else, how child custody will be taken care of, etc. Well, in this instance, one of the things that Joseph agreed to do, open, volitionally, willingly, is that under this postnuptial agreement, he said, I agree not to divorce you, Rebecca, for at least 20 years, so that you can stay on my health coverage, because he was an employee of Caterpillar. Caterpillar provided health coverage to both of them, and he said, therefore, because I won't get a divorce for 20 years, you will be on the Caterpillar health coverage for at least 20 years. And in the event I do divorce you, well, then I will be responsible for your medical expenses. Well, interestingly enough, time went forward just a few years, and Joseph jumps up and files for divorce. Rebecca responds through her attorneys by saying, wait a second, you can't do this, because you promised not to get a divorce for at least 20 years, and 20 years is not gone by. Well, through his attorneys, Joseph said, hang on a second, let's look at this agreement. It provides that I won't divorce you for at least 20 years, but in the event I do, then I will be responsible for your medical expenses, because the whole thrust of this is that you will be covered under the Caterpillar medical coverage. Well, the case went forward on the divorce action, and at trial, the judge decided, Joseph, you're right. You can get a divorce. You guys have been living separate and apart for over a year. You guys can go forward. You can get a divorce. Rebecca wasn't happy at all, and she appealed the case, went up to a Virginia Court of Appeals, and there the court looked at this and listened to both arguments, and the court took a very close look at the postnuptial agreement, and it really applied normal contract principles. And it said, okay, a deal is a deal. You've entered the deal. But when we look at this, we have to look at the entire agreement. Rebecca, you keep talking about this one clause. The one clause is that Joseph promised not to get a divorce for at least 20 years, and in the event he does, then he will have to be responsible for your medical expenses by virtue of the fact you're no longer covered under his employer's health plan. So, when we look at that and when we consider it, we look at the fact that while it states in one clause that he won't seek a divorce for 20 years, the contract also has a provision that in the event of divorce, then he's going to be responsible for your health care costs. Well, in view of that, it's obvious that the contract anticipated a breach of the contract, anticipated that one of the clauses of the contract would in fact not be lived up to by one of the parties, in short, that Joseph would go forward with a divorce. And in view of that, it's obvious that the contract did not intend that the promise not to get a divorce would be fully enforceable, since it basically provided an alternative. In view of that, we find that while the contract is enforceable, we have to enforce it in its totality. We find the clause that prevents Joseph from getting a divorce is not enforceable. We find the clause that provides he is to provide medical care is enforceable, and accordingly, he's allowed to get a divorce, but he does have to pay for your medical expenses. So what do we find? A couple important points. One, that a contract needs to be read in its entirety. And number two, that parties, when I say a party, parties to a marriage can enter into a postnuptial agreement by which they agree how they will handle affairs if in fact a divorce takes place. Okay, hey, we bring you this case, we bring cases every week, so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.